Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Sam Hurst, and this is a very brief introduction to talking about meter and rhythm, how to work it out and how to discuss it when we're analysing poetry. I'm sorry for my voice at the moment, I am losing it, but hopefully you'll be able to follow along with me. So talking about meter and rhythm, what are we actually talking about when we use this word meter? Well, meter refers to the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables that we find in the lines of a poem. Each line is divided into feet, and each of these feet holds usually either 2 or 3 syllables, and in each of those feet there is a clear stress pattern. So let's have a look at this first example from Edna St. Vincent Millay. What lips my lips have kissed, and where and why? Hopefully you can hear a rhythm to that, but what we have here are 5 feet, each of which have 2 syllables, and you can see quite clearly that stressed pattern. Unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. So you also have poems which are divided into feet of 3 syllables, like this famous poem you're probably acquainted with, A Visit from St. Nicholas. Here there are 4 feet, each of which has 3 syllables. 'Twas the night before Christmas and all through the house. So the first example is an example of a duple meter, i.e. each of those feet has 2 syllables. And the second example is a triple meter. Now the duple meter is far more common than the triple meter and should probably be your default if you're guessing and you're a little bit desperate. It's more likely to be a duple meter, but we'll work out during the course of this quick class how to work out whether it's duple or triple. So don't be put off or dismayed that there are 2 main types. So what do we call our meters? You'll be thinking, well, I know an iambic pentameter, that's the most famous one. How do I get to that decision? How do I know that it's iambic? How do I know that it's pentameter? Well, let's first of all look at that word pentameter, because the name of the meter depends on the number of feet. So a pentameter will have 5 feet. So a dimeter has 2 feet, a trimeter has 3 feet, a tetrameter has 4 feet, a pentameter has 5 feet, a hexameter has 6 feet, and a heptameter has 7 feet. Now, if this is a duple meter, i.e. each foot has 2 syllables, that means that we times by 2. It's a little bit of maths. A tetrameter has 4 feet of 2 syllables, therefore it should have 8 syllables. A heptameter that is in a triple meter should have 7 feet of 3 syllables, i.e. 21 syllables. Let's have a look at some examples, because some of these are going to be more common than others. I've got an example here of each of these types of meter. Most of them are duple meters. So this is a duple dimeter that we've got here. Baba Yaga. It's got 2 feet of 2 syllables each. Baba Yaga. Now the easiest way to work out the number of feet is to do some counting of syllables. So I've got the dead began to speak for our second example, 6 syllables. Now this could go either way, mathematically speaking. It could be a dimeter with each foot having 3 syllables in it, 2 times 3, or it could be a trimeter with each foot having 2 syllables, 3 times 2. How do we know which it is? Well, we need to look at the stress pattern. So the dead began to speak. You can see here there are 3 stress syllables, so this pattern is divided into feet of 2 syllables. The dead began to speak. 3 feet of 2 syllables each. With the second syllable in each pair stressed. That's the pattern. Let's have a look at the next example. Do our counting. 1,000 martyrs I have made. 8 syllables. That's likely to be a tetrameter, a duple tetrameter with each foot having 2 syllables. Let's check. Yeah, 1,000 martyrs I have made. Now, I've also put in an example of a tetrameter with feet of 3 syllables, so a triple. Let's have a look at this one by Martin's Deep. If a boy is caught drinking in the fragrance of bloom. So there are 4 feet, You can see 4 stressed syllables, 4 feet of 3 syllables each. The next example, probably the one you're almost familiar with, is a pentameter. It's got 10 syllables. If thou must love me, let it be for naught. 5 syllables, 5 feet, each of 2 syllables. The next example is a hexameter. Fierce wars and faithful love shall moralize my song. 12 syllables there, 6 feet of 2 syllables each. And in the final, we have a heptameter. As I in heavy winter's night stood shivering in the snow. 14 syllables, 7 feet of 2 syllables each, as we can see here. So counting will help us work out the number of syllables, which will usually lead us to the number of feet. With numbers like 6 and 12, it's not immediately obvious. That could be a duple meter or a trimeter, so we have to look at the stress pattern to decide which it is. So, for example, the Martin's Deep has 12 syllables, the Edmund Spenser has 12 syllables, but you can see the very different stress patterns there, making the Martin's Deep poem a tetrameter and the Edmund Spenser a hexameter, 6 times 2 versus 4 times 3. So we've identified the pentameter part of iambic pentameter. So let's work out that first word that we're going to be using. To identify whether it's iambic or trochaic or anapaestic or dactylic, we need to work out the stress pattern. So iambic is used when talking about duple meters, and it's when the stress pattern is da-da, so unstressed and then stressed. So from the previous page, we have an example. The dead began to speak. That's an iambic trimeter. Trochaic goes duh, duh. The first syllable is stressed and then unstressed. So one of the most famous examples is Tiger, Tiger by William Blake, which goes tiger, tiger, burning bright. There's a syllable missing at the end, and we'll come back to that as an irregularity later. But that is the stress pattern that we're seeing. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. That's a trochaic tetrameter. Now, if we're looking at triple meters, the two most common are anapaestic and dactylic. Anapaestic goes da-da-da, da-da-da. So unstressed, unstressed, stressed. If a boy is caught drinking the fragrance of bloom. That's an anapaestic tetrameter there from the Martin's Deep poem. A dactylic rhythm goes da, da, da. So stressed, unstressed, unstressed. So one of the most famous examples of this is Alfred Lord Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. So that rhythm of da, 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 da is dactylic, and this is a dactylic dimeter. So in order to find out the name of the meter, we need to be counting our syllables, working out whether it's dimeter, trimeter, tetrameter, pentameter, hexameter, heptameter, and then working out the stress pattern. Is it iambic, trochaic, anapaestic, dactylic? You'll also find that there are some irregular types of stress that might appear. You can usually identify, particularly in older poems, an overall meter or rhythm. Far less true with modern poetry. But even in those regular poems, there will often be slight irregularities in certain lines. And one of the common irregularities you'll find is the introduction of these type of feet in a duple meter. So a spondee, where both syllables are stressed, duh, duh, and a pyrrhic, where neither syllable is stressed, duh, duh. I've put the example here at the bottom from Alfred Lord Tennyson again, in Memoriam, where you have an example of a pyrrhic followed by a spondee. When the blood creeps and the nerves prick. So look out for spondees and pyrrhics when you're analysing your poetry. So how do we identify stress? Now, you might be able to simply read the poem and get into the rhythm and feel that rhythm as it's carrying you along. But I know that a lot of my students have struggled to identify stress patterns, and the more you think about it, the more you get confused often. And that's completely normal. It happens to a lot of people. So let's work out how we can step by step think about identifying the stress patterns and the stress in the lines. The easiest thing to start with is to think about word stress in multisyllabic words. Words have a usual or a normal stress pattern, and this will depend on, to some extent, the form of English that you're using, but most words have fairly standard stress patterns across variations of English. Let's have a look at a couple of the words here. We've got table, alive, moralize. There's an orange cube missing there, sorry about that. Moralize. Insufficient, traveller or traveller. Now, if you think, well, I don't know what the word stress is on a certain word, the easy way to do this, there are two easy ways to do this. The first way is to say the word overstressing each syllable. So, for example, table, table, and listen to the one that sounds most correct. Now, it's quite obviously table, isn't it? Another easy way to do this is to look online or look in a dictionary at the words that you're looking for, and you will find the stress of the word indicated in relation to the form of English that you're using often. So this is just from Google. You can see I've looked for the word moralize, and you can see here this is written in phonetic script, but look for the little quotation mark or the little apostrophe here. That means that this is the stressed syllable. This I've taken from a dictionary entry online. The word is well kept, and you can see there is a small mark here at the bottom and at the top to tell us that both of these syllables are stressed, which you'll quite often find in portmanteau words. Well kept, and you can see here the UK version and the US version. Now in this case it's the same, it's not always the same of course, but you can find the stress pattern relevant to the form of English that you're looking for. Not every form of English is covered, but you can find a few different examples online. So this is one way to start working out the stress pattern. So let's have a look and try out this method on a poem that my class looked at as one of its examples or, for the assessment. This is I Am by John Clare. Now, not that many multisyllabic words, but we can find a few, and we can already perhaps start to find the pattern of the stresses. Particularly that line, like shadows in love's frenzied, stifled throes, starts to become clear how that pattern is working. But if you're still stuck and you're not able to work from there, don't worry, there's other things we can do. Let's get into what we think about the monosyllables. Now this is something that might change between performances of a poem, but these are between particular poems as well. One word used in one poem might be stressed and in another poem might be unstressed, depending on the meaning, the emphasis, the stress pattern. These are some general rules. They can also be broken by the performer if they so desire, if they're wishing to put stress in a different place. But generally speaking, frequently unstressed monosyllables are conjunctions like and or but, prepositions, particularly in phrasal verbs. So if you think of, for example, looking forward to, the to is rarely, if ever, emphasized. Auxiliary verbs, so this is words like don't, haven't, aren't in verbal phrases. So for example, I'm not reading, I am reading. I haven't been, I don't like. The don't is more often stressed, but auxiliary verbs are much more rarely stressed than main verbs if they don't carry their own specific meaning. So if you think, for example, of I am reading, there's no extra meaning added to that am. It's simply an auxiliary verb which is telling you about the tense of the verb. Something else that's rarely stressed is an article like the and a, And often the verb more broadly to be is unstressed, although we're going to be finding an exception to that rule in the poem I Am. Frequently stressed monosyllables include key verbs, nouns, adjectives, and question words, carriers of meaning within the sentence. So let's have a look at I am again. And I've highlighted in green some of the words that we might think probably carry a stress. Now, I think here you can start to very, very clearly see a stress pattern. We know that this poem has 10 syllables to a line. I am, yet what I am, none cares or knows. And we can see the fact that the last syllables are frequently stressed and the second to last unstressed and the one before that stressed. Means that this is probably going to be an iambic pentameter. Da, 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 da. As we're reading, we've already got quite a few of those stresses in there. So I am, yet what I am, none cares or knows. My friends forsake me like a memory lost. As we start to realise the rhythm, it can carry us along and we can start to fill in some of the gaps. My friends forsake me like a memory lost. I am the self-consumer of my woes. They rise and vanish in oblivious host. And yet I am. But there are still some little questions remaining in this poem because there are some irregularities. It doesn't really fit, does it, if we're saying I am, yet what I am, none cares or knows, doesn't quite sound right. What we have here are some spondies around this phrase I am, because there's no complement to the to be verb here. There's no adjective, there's no noun, there's no verb. It stands alone. It carries its own meaning. It's a declaration. I am, yet what I am, none cares or knows. My friends forsake me like a memory lost. I am the self-consumer of my woes. They rise and vanish in oblivious host, like shadows in love's frenzied, stifled throes. And yet I am and live like vapours tossed. So there are some other irregularities here we see in the second to last line in shadows, in like shadows, in love's frenzied. There is an irregularity to that line. There is a stutter almost, which echoes that frenzied feel, that out of control feel. Most importantly, we have these spondy feet. I am, what I am, none cares or knows. So we've identified the overall meter here, iambic pentameter, and we've identified some meaningful irregularities that can become a point of comment for us in our poetic analysis. Why is the I am so clearly stressed here? And it's a stress that is reiterated through its repetition. This I am with nothing else, no adjective, noun, verb. Is it a sign of confusion, an unfinished sentence? Or is it a powerful declaration, an ontological declaration of existence? Is it a reference, a Christian reference, or a religious reference more broadly to the idea of God as the great I am? Reusing and intersecting with that language or imagery. Whatever you think is going on, the meter has pointed us towards something that is worthy of comment and that perhaps changes and influences the meaning of the poem. A couple of other common irregularities are worth looking at. So we have what's called an initial trochaic inversion. Initial trochaic inversion sounds complicated, actually quite simple. This will often occur in an iambic meter, as we find in this poem by Cold Mackay, America. Although she feeds me bread of bitterness and sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth, Stealing my breath of life, I will confess. I love this cultured hell that tests my youth. We have quite clearly here an iambic meter, an iambic pentameter indeed, but we do have some irregularities, particularly in this third line. This is what we call the initial tracheic inversion. So if you imagine this line is divided into its 5 feet, stealing my breath of life, I will confess. So 4 of those feet have the regular iambic stress pattern, my breath of life, I will confess. But the first one, the initial one, is tracheic instead. So it's a tracheic inversion. The iambic is inverted into the tracheic. So stealing my breath of life, I will confess. We've noted it. What can we say about it? Now, I had a great comment in one of my classes about this, the idea that this replicates the very idea of the stealing of breath, where the rhythm is slightly broken. There's an irregularity, almost like a gasp or an intake of breath. Stealing my breath of life. Similarly, in line 2, you have an irregularity which lends itself to the imagery being used and sinks into my throat, her tiger's tooth. You have a pyrrhic there, I would say, and sinks into my throat. For me, that draws out this sense of the elongated moment, the sinking into the throat as the slow tear. You might disagree. See what your comment would be. I've given another example of an initial tracheic inversion here to show that there isn't one single answer for any type of irregularity. You'll be familiar with the poem Ozymandias, I'm sure, by Percy Shelley. And this particularly famous line, "Look on my works, ye mighty and despair." Again, we have an iambic meter occurring generally within the poem and within this line. Of the 4 of the 5 feet have an iambic stress pattern, my works, ye mighty, ye might, ye and despair. But that first foot, there is an initial tracheic inversion, but here it's the emphasis, the command that is foregrounded. Look on my works. Look on them. So it is this kind of powerful voice being reflected in the meter of the poem. I'm hoping you're beginning to see how meter can really add layers and interest to our reading of poetry. So let's finish with a final type, a couple of types of irregularity. I said we'd go back to Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, and so we are. This is an example of catalectic writing where you have a missing syllable essentially at the end of the line. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, instead of tiger, tiger, burning brightly, which would fulfill the stress pattern. Here the final syllable is missing. Generally speaking, I would say here that what this brings is a sense of emphasis on that final word. It makes the image stark, but you can decide for yourselves. Another sort of fairly common irregularity, particularly with iambic pentameter, is hypercatalectic lines, where you have an extra syllable at the end. So Sonnet 20 here by William Shakespeare is an iambic pentameter generally throughout, but you can see that in the first and third lines both, there is an added unstressed syllable at the end. A woman's face with nature's own hand painted. A woman's gentle heart, but no acquainted. A woman's gentle heart, but no acquainted. It's 11 syllables. There's that extra syllable at the end. Other common irregularities include the use of spondees and pyrrhics, but you'll find, particularly in more modern poetry, that you won't be getting a meter that runs throughout in a lot of poetry, where you're finding a couple of irregularities. So you have to engage quite closely with the meter of each line or section, what the poet is doing with their patterns of stress, the rhythms of the lines, the movement through the poem. I hope this has been helpful. Remember, the easiest way to get started is to go back to basics. Do your counting, work out which of those meters it is, pentameter, tetrameter, hexameter. Work out the stress pattern, whether it's duple or triple, and then what that stress pattern is, by going through those steps if you need to, checking out the word stress, figuring out what monosyllables would likely be stressed, and then filling in the gaps, and then analyze those irregularities for meaning. I hope it's helpful. Have a good evening and goodbye.